So Netflix has a reality show called Love is Blind, which I haven't seen, so please forgive me if I say something wrong about it, but it seems like the concept is pretty simple. Apparently, the show pairs up some men and women, and they talk to each other and get to know each other without physically seeing each other at all. When a man and a woman talk to each other, each of them is in an isolated environment called a pod, where each can only hear the other's voice. If things really work out, the man asks the woman to marry him, or I guess it could happen the other way around. If the woman says yes, they then see each other for the first time. And Netflix pays for the wedding, I think, so that's cool. But anyway, as interesting as all of this is, I'm not making this video to talk about what happens on Love is Blind, or at least not what's supposed to happen on the show. I'm here to talk about a lawsuit by a contestant on Love is Blind and a legal concept called personal jurisdiction, which is something that it's going to be helpful to you to understand if you want to produce independent films. I'm also going to talk about ways that you can avoid the risk, if you have an indie film production company, of being dragged into court in far-off states and maybe even far-off countries that have little or nothing to do with your movie or TV show or whatever type of project you're producing. But before we get into that, just a couple of disclaimers, because we lawyers, as always, can't resist disclaiming things. First, I'm not going to be giving you legal advice, because if I were to give you legal advice, I would need to know your specific circumstances and your specific needs. And right now, I'm just a random lawyer talking to you on the internet. And second, I'm going to be talking about matters of U.S. law. So if you are shooting your film or whatever type of project outside the United States, or your production company is located outside the United States, the legal concepts that I talk about in this video might not apply to you. Also, if you found this video helpful, please like this video and subscribe to this channel so I can keep bringing you young, hungry, independent filmmakers the kind of educational content that you deserve. Anyway, there was a participant in the Love is Blind show whose name was Tran Dang, who in early 2022 lived in Houston, Texas. Dang sued the company that produces Love is Blind, which is called Kinetic Content. Kinetic, of course, is located in Los Angeles, California. According to Dang, she was assaulted by another participant in Love is Blind, whose name was Thomas Smith, while the show was filming in Mexico. She claimed that Kinetic should be liable for the alleged assault because Smith, she said, temporarily became an employee of Kinetic for the purposes of shooting the show, and Kinetic was negligent in failing to prevent the attack from happening. Also, Dang claimed that after she got back to Houston, Texas from Mexico, Kinetic required her to be on call for a while in a Houston hotel and prohibited her from leaving her hotel room without Kinetic's permission, and they took away her phone, her passport, and her wallet. Based on these alleged actions, Dang claimed that Kinetic was liable for something called false imprisonment, which basically means restricting somebody's movement against their will. Dang filed her lawsuit in state court in Houston, Texas. Kinetic moved to dismiss the lawsuit because, Kinetic said, the Texas court didn't have what's called personal jurisdiction over Kinetic. What is personal jurisdiction? The idea behind this concept in U.S. law is that a person shouldn't have to appear for a trial in a state that has nothing to do with the facts of the dispute. So, for example, let's say that I act in your production company's film and you shoot the film in California. I say that I was injured on the set of the film, which I hope is something that never actually happens to you in real life, and I file a lawsuit. Because I live in Lawrence, Kansas, I filed my lawsuit against your production company in Kansas. In this situation, it's possible that you could get my lawsuit dismissed because the Kansas court doesn't have personal jurisdiction over your production company. My injury in this example took place on the set of a film in California, and all the work that I did relating to the film happened in California. It would seem kind of unfair in this situation for you to be required to appear for a trial in Kansas just because I live there, when no aspect of the production happened in Kansas. You and I may have talked on the phone to negotiate the terms of my employment or something like that while I was in Kansas. But usually a defendant's remote communications with someone in a particular state are not enough to give rise to personal jurisdiction over the defendant in that state. So the question for the court in a situation like this is basically, are there enough connections between the dispute the court is hearing and the state the court is located in, that is Kansas in this example, to make it fair to require the defendant to stand trial there? And the answer to this question isn't always cut and dried, and it often involves balancing a bunch of different factors against each other. For example, suppose that you came to Lawrence, Kansas to meet me in person and talk about the project. Does that make it more reasonable for me to expect to be sued in Kansas? That becomes more of a judgment call for the court, and the result becomes less predictable. Also, this gets even more complicated when we consider that most civil lawsuits involve a bunch of different claims for relief or legal theories. That is, in the personal injury case example I've been talking about, suppose I sue you for negligence because I slipped and fell on the movie set. But I also sue you for breach of my employment contract because I claim that you haven't paid me everything that I was owed. It may be that the Kansas court has personal jurisdiction over you, but only with regard to certain claims that I've asserted. The court might rule that it's fair for you to have to defend my negligence claim in a court in Kansas, but not my breach of contract claim, because the contract wasn't negotiated in Kansas, and like I said, the film shoot took place in California. On that note, back to the Love is Blind lawsuit. Kinetic claimed that the Houston, Texas court where Dang filed her lawsuit didn't have personal jurisdiction because the alleged attack on Dang happened in Mexico. Dang responded that portions of the show were actually shot in Houston, Texas, even though the assault didn't happen there. And that, like I discussed, Kinetic allegedly trapped Dang in her hotel room or ordered her to stay there and took away her wallet and her passport and phone and so forth. The Court of Appeals of Texas said that because the attack allegedly happened in Mexico, and that was the focus of Dang's assault claims against Kinetic, the court didn't have personal jurisdiction over Kinetic with respect to the assault claims. That is to say that the assault claims weren't sufficiently connected to the state of Texas to justify requiring Kinetic to go on trial for them in Texas. Yes, parts of the show were shot in Houston, the court acknowledged, but these assault claims had to do with the alleged behavior by Mr. Smith in Mexico. The court reached a different result when it came to this false imprisonment claim, that is the claim that Kinetic required Dang to stay in her hotel room. Dang was located in Houston when Kinetic supposedly told her not to leave her hotel, so it was pretty easy for the court to find that the false imprisonment claim was sufficiently connected to Texas to justify requiring Kinetic to defend that claim in Texas. There were some additional negligence claims that the court had to look at in doing the personal jurisdiction discussion, but I won't talk about those claims because this is probably complicated and long enough already, right? So to sum up, according to the Texas Court of Appeals, Kinetic didn't have to litigate Dang's assault claims in Texas, although she could refile them in a court located in a state where Kinetic was subject to personal jurisdiction, for instance, California, where Kinetic has its headquarters. But Kinetic was required to litigate the false imprisonment claims in Texas. It's not the best possible outcome for Kinetic. Now it has to either litigate part of the case in Texas and part of it in California, which of course adds to the time and expense involved, or it has to voluntarily agree to litigate the whole thing in Texas, unless Dang agrees to voluntarily litigate the lawsuit in California, which she probably won't, because her attorneys probably filed this case in Texas in the first place, thinking that doing that would give them some kind of, hometown advantage. What could Kinetic, the production company, have done to prevent this situation? One thing I didn't see anything about in the court's order was something called a forum selection clause. This means a clause in a contract saying that any dispute that arises out of the contract has to be litigated in a particular forum, usually meaning in the courts of a particular state. In other words, Kinetic could have had Dang sign a contract when she agreed to be part of Love is Blind, saying that she would have to bring any lawsuit having to do with the production in a court located in Los Angeles, California. If Kinetic had done that, and Dang had sued Kinetic in a court in Houston, Texas, Kinetic probably would have been able to get the court to dismiss the case and force Dang to refile her claims in California, which would have been more convenient and less expensive for Kinetic. So if you have a production company that's working on an independent film, a forum selection clause is definitely something that I'd suggest putting in your contracts with your cast and crew. You don't want to end up getting dragged into court in a state that's far away from you, where you might not be fully familiar with the law and you have to retain lawyers that you haven't worked with before, and so on. So hopefully that was helpful to you in understanding this concept of personal jurisdiction and how it relates to making an independent film. And thank you for watching.